of Gael in the first millennium recorded this prayer. I arise today through mighty strength, God's power to guide me, God's might to uphold me, God's eyes to watch over me, God's ear to hear me, God's word to give me speech, God's hand to guard me, God's way to lie before me, God's shield to shelter me, God's host to secure me. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Home. Whether you're, I guess, Dorothy talking to Toto, or whether you're playing baseball, rounding the bases, home is where you want to be. Home is where you're safe. You might be seeing it again for the first time. Home is where you know who and whose you are. Home. And there's no place like it. Grandpa, tell us the story one more time about how you wrestled that angel and that angel threw your hip out of socket. Okay. Tell you the story one more. I love that story. It is one of the most truthful, one of the most authoritative stories of Scripture. Now, did it happen this way? I don't know. Let's talk about it. Let's get Jacob to the Jabbok, where he wrestles. In Hebrew, that is Jabbok. They all sound familiar, don't they? They all sound the same. Jacob, the Jabbok, the Jabbok. The name, the place, the event, the wrestle, the match. Peniel, face of God. It is the place where Jacob wrestled on the Jabbok and beheld the face of God and his name. Okay, get us there. How did he get, why is he at the Jabbok? Or Jabbok? Go ahead, somebody. Hello?
Returning home.
Yeah, he had Jacob had been in Haran for 20 years. He had been working for his father-in-law. He had been getting rich. His father-in-law and his son's brothers-in-law were not. And they were none too pleased with him. As I say here, they were displeased with him. And he had what are some of the things he did to get have his brothers displeased, or his brothers-in-law displeased with him? There was dead silence. That probably wasn't it, though. Well, he had worked for 7 years for one wife, then he worked for 7 years for the other wife, then he worked for another 6 years, and during that 6 years, he was told, Laban changed his wages 10 times during that time, and he complains about that 2 or 3 times. And if you read the story, it's in there. I'm not making that part up. But he complains about his wages 3 or 4 times. He also wanted to, Laban said, oh, you can have all of the speckled goats and rams and stuff, right? So what Laban did before he said that to him, 3 days before, he went out in the field, he took them all out, and he put them in another pasture many miles away. So when Jacob gets up, he goes up there, there aren't none there. Imagine that. Laban being true to form, being Laban. Very truthful man, a very honorable man. Just like his sister. Truthful, honorable. Jacob is told in a dream how to do genetic engineering with the sheep. Remember they come to feed, they had the poles that were striped, they did the breeding, and then he became rich. He became richer than Laban. And as it goes, the scriptures say, he found that he was in disfavor with his father-in-law. Imagine that. And with his brothers-in-law. And he was warned in a dream to go back home. Imagine how that occurs. Displeased, warned to go back home. So he takes everything up and he takes off. And Laban hears, of course he does this kind of in the middle of the night, because he's taking all the sheep and everything else with him. Laban hears about it. What does Laban do? Oh, great, go ahead, my son. Go off with all my blessing. Take this too. This is the first plundering. There's another one that occurs when Moses takes the children out of Israel. But this is the plundering that occurs. And what happens? There's one of his favorite wife takes a household god of Laban's. Laban is a pagan. even though he hears God's in some of this. Laban still has household gods. So what Rachel does, Rachel takes a household god, takes it with her, and they run off. Laban catches up with them and searches the tent. Of course, Jacob doesn't know this, that this has occurred. Searches the tent, can't find it. The wife is sitting on it, won't get off her camel. You can read up why. I won't tell you with that part. But she won't get up for him. And Laban says he searches and he can't find it. He says, man, I made a big mistake. But why didn't he just kill him? They took the prop. Of course, he had his wives, his daughters. For the sake of that, they said, we're going to form a covenant here. And how do they form the covenant? They gather stones. They gather stones, and he sets up an Ebenezer stone, another one, the first one. Well, he sets up one at Bethel earlier on the way out of town. Now he's coming back through, and he passed by Bethel and remembered that God was with him. He sets up a pillar stone in Ebenezer, and both sides, his people and Laban's people, they gather stones. They gather them together and they make their pile. Sounds like Ecclesiastes, doesn't it? There is a time to gather stones together and make a covenant, and that's what they were doing. And I can imagine during this process, John, that they were hefting these stones and they're thinking, man, I'm really mad at my father-in-law, Laban. And Laban said, man, I'm really mad at my son-in-law. And by the time they get through with all the stuff and the brothers and everybody's mad, and they've gone through this labor together, touching something common, ritually placing it, offering a sacrifice, having a meal, and blessing the area, they've set up a border. They've set up a memory pile of rock that unless somebody in the future of their descendants wants to gather, they gathered the stones, unless somebody else wants to knock them down, they're going to have to remember this covenant that they went through and decide that it no longer is valid. They do that, and they part company. Right? Laban goes back, Haram, and Jacob turns around and then says, holy moly, I made that part up. He said, I've got to face Esau. So what does he do? Arnold, he says, I'm going to send the messengers out. So the messengers go out and they catch up with Esau. Esau writes back, I'm going to come there and stomp you into the ground. No, what does Esau do? Nothing. He says, okay, I'm coming. And the messengers come back and say, hey, Esau's coming, he's got 400 men. And what does Jacob do? Oh. He panics and he prays. Imagine that. He prays for the first time. Now, he has acknowledged God's presence at other times. That's not quite the same thing. He prays. He lays it out and says, I'm in a heap of trouble here. I've got Esau coming. He's got 400 men. What am I going to do? Oh, by the way, God, and of course now he remembers, the great manipulator, now he remembers that God was going to bless him with all his progeny and all his territory. He says, man, if I'm dead, how can that work out? You know what I'm saying, God? You got to be right here now for me. Well, apparently he didn't trust, but what does he do? Yeah, he forms a shield of women and children and donkeys and everything else and camels, and he sends all of this across the river. Esau's coming, here, you guys, work it out. And he sends it all across. Everything. And then, and his favorite wife, God bless him, he sends her over last. Goes back across the river and spends the night. Now, put yourself in his place. What do you think? Man, I shouldn't have listened to my mom. I can hear mom's voice over and over again in my head. Go ahead, rip off your brother. It'll be all right. God's with you. Why did I listen to God? I'm in this place. I'm between, literally, a rock and a hard place. He can't go back. That future's cut off. He cannot go back to where he came from. Think about it, folks. That is a future no longer. Comforting, maybe. Frightening, maybe. But it's true. You can't go back to that relationship. You can't go back to that job. You can't go back to that hometown, that town, whatever it is. That future is cut off. You're done. You can't go back to that, whatever it is, because that future is done. The only thing you can do is go forward. When my children were much smaller, I could wrestle with them, and I could beat them by falling on them. The oldest one, the daughter, we didn't wrestle, we played Tickle Monster, and occasionally the Tickle Monster would get wore out and have to go back and hide somewhere. Occasionally she would get wore out and let the Tickle Monster rest. But the boys, when we got to going with it, now, I don't know how many of you wrestle with your kids, but we all do it. And could you beat them up if you really wanted to? maybe you want to. No, of course not. What you want to do is let them work things out, let them exercise their muscles, let them learn some moves, let them know what it means to struggle with somebody who isn't going to hurt, somebody who's going to love them. Also, there are times when we're so angry with our kids that we don't even want to look at them. They're so angry with us, they don't want to look at us. They're angry with the world. Oh, that relationship ended. And when it did, well, they're so angry that they don't even want to show their face outside their room. All you see is the back of their head or other things. That's all they want to do. They're mad, they're angry. There are times, Bill, when they're so hurt or so afraid at night, you just want to hug them. You hold them. And you stay with them. And you let them thrash out whatever it is that's bugging them. Whatever has a hold of them. The dream, the relationship that ended. They didn't get invited to the party, or they invited folks that didn't show up. And they're hurt. And you hold them close. And when you can finally look into their eyes, when they finally face you, you say, you know, you're mine, and I love you, and I'm not going to leave you. I'm right here. Thrash and stab and jab. Do whatever you want to, but I'm just going to hold you close. And many of you all done that. You just grab a hold of them and you don't let go. And they know that you love them and you're going to let them work it out. Jacob, his prayer could have been, my God, why have you forsaken me? Sound familiar? All is lost, why have you forsaken me? And whatever it was that grabbed a hold of him, and it took him one night in this case, but he could have just been shortening the story. This could have taken years. When you're in the pit, and you're depressed, and you feel alone, and you feel like everybody has just deserted you, and you've sent away those that you love, thinking you're going to protect yourself in the process, that feeling, that pit, Jeremiah was in the pit. That pit can last a long time. Peter in the pit when he denied knowing the Christ. Jobs in, relationships in, and we question where God is in the whole process. And we're not alone. Morning. Jacob, fitful night. Now, if your hip is out of socket, do you limp? You can't even move. I mean, if you pull a muscle wrestling, I could see that, but if your hip is out of socket, you're just going to lay there. You're not going to move. So, is there a little bit of exaggeration on Jacob's part? Oh, no, Jacob wouldn't do that. A little bit of exaggeration, tell the story. And that's good, because it's a story that it seems to me like, when I read it, that Jacob's telling it. I mean, this is my story, man. This is how we got who we are. This is how our tribe is named. This is who we are. So in the morning, what does he do? Jumps up. He goes across. He gets in front of everybody, everything, and he greets his brother Esau. What does Esau do? Esau reaches out and just slaps him real hard? No. No. They cry. They weep together. They hug each other. Esau has worked this thing out. It's like Ishmael. Ishmael worked it out. There's a difference. Just because you're not chosen doesn't mean you're forgotten. And to be in the presence of God, Esau still had God's blessings. Ishmael still had God's blessings. Esau's people rose to be great kings, and his descendants were kings. They sided with Nebuchadnezzar when they took out Jerusalem and destroyed the temple, and they're kind of lost to history. But Esau didn't need this stuff. All Esau wanted to do was see his brother. Esau's treasure was elsewhere. Now, what does Esau say when all this procession goes in front of him? He says, what's going on here, brother? Why all this stuff? You know, the drama queen that he was, the one who just had to have something to eat. Jacob said, basically, I thought this would appease you and make you happy. Esau said, I don't need any of your stuff. Jacob said, oh, I want you to take it. And Jacob has this, some kind of something for another. Esau takes it. Esau's not a fool. Esau does take some of what Jacob's offering. But, my gosh. Home. Now, before this apparition, this being released him, what happened? I want you to bless me. And the being blesses him by telling him who he is. The being blesses him by holding up a mirror in front of him and shows him who he is, face to face, with the God who loves him. We are created in the image of a God that loves us. And if we can see, if we can be in the presence of God, heaven help us. Jacob wrestled and came into the presence of a God who loved him enough to tell him the truth about who he was and who his people were. You are Israel. Your name's such because you strive with God. And you strive with other human beings. Does Israel strive with other human beings? Does Israel strive with God? We're part of that covenant relationship. To be blessed is not to be left alone. To be blessed is not to be left alone. We are in the presence of a God who has us in a, well, it's not a dance because Jacob wasn't dancing, I guess. It's a wrestling hold, a bear hug by a God who loves us and isn't going to let us go. We need to remember that when we're between a rock and a hard place. And we're not in the presence of our heavenly parent, God, Father, who loves us, who names us his own, and tells us we are his, and we are known by him. We are known by him. All of us, top to bottom, in and out, warts and all. And he loves us anyway.